Jack Burton and the Pork Chop Express, and I'm talking to whoever's listening out there.
Welcome to the Pork Chop Podcast, so named for the Pork Chop Express from John Carpenter's Big Trouble in Little China, because in our first season, for want of a better word, season sounds ridiculously like, it implies for a start there might be more, and there's no guarantee we'll even finish this one.
There's definitely none.
So anyway, this podcast for the time being is going to be a deep dive into the work of John Carpenter by two grumpy film nerds, grumpily grumping through chats about cults, films and cults. Could be cults. Could just be cults.
Yeah. I do find it hard to be grumpy with John Carpenter, though. But
you'll do your best, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's going to be very grumpy and nerdy. And we, at some point, we might have guests, but there's no guarantee, and you never know. Anyway, my name is Rich Matthews, and my co-host is the Franco-Anglais filmmaker and former primary school teaching assistant, Jonathan Zarin. What is the French pronunciation of your surname?
Zoran.
Zorin, yeah. But everyone calls you Zarin, don't they, here? Pretty much. Do they?
Better than Zurin, yeah?
Zurin? As in, like, urine?
Yeah, exactly. Which does, actually, you know, when you hear Zurin, it sounds a little bit exotic, it doesn't sound so bad, but then when people introduce you as Jonathan Zurin.
Zurin.
So you're Jonathan's pissed. Ha 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 ha.
Oh.
Wrong pronunciation.
It should be Zarin.
Zoran, exactly.
Zarin.
Yeah.
So, the plan is, to the best of our ability in our hugely non-professional way, is we're going to talk about two John Carpenter films per episode. So it'll be about 10 episodes because in honour of Big Trouble in Little China, that will have its own episode. Because in many ways, you'll hear lots of wanky stuff like this, but in many ways it's like the tipping point for his career. If you think of an apex in many ways, no quality judgment on that, but you know we'll get more into that later. And as I say, if anyone listens, maybe we'll do another filmmaker or another theme if we get enough people wanting to hear more from us sad old men. Mainly Jonathan, because you know he's actually making films, so how to follow him.
Do I?
Yeah, you know, at least 10 people are going to definitely listen to this.
All right. Well.
Yeah, including Sarah, maybe.
3.
Yeah. And in the end, though, it doesn't matter. None of it matters because
It's all in the reflexes.
Episode 1, Dark Star and Assault on Precinct 13. Two absolute cult classics for very different reasons. We'll do them film by film. Well, I'll run through some key facts for us to discuss and for Jonathan to respond to, no doubt, including some critical reviews and the always incredibly valuable Rotten Tomatoes aggregate score. He just made a vomiting face if that didn't come over.
Gross.
And also, in case you think we're completely out of touch, we have a Zoomer review of each film, which we will listen to, and then I will get Jonathan's reaction to. And it is my 13-year-old daughter, so please be kind. God bless her, being put through.
Yeah,
the
absolutely. You're abusing your
not my daughter
fatherly status.
Where was that going to finish?
That was a weird pause. That was a weird pause.
Like, oh my God, no, I'm not. Trust me, I was so worried. The film I was worried about her seeing, because I thought it would be too much, took in her stride.
She's seen them all now?
No, she's about halfway through.
So the thing, did that go alright?
We can't go into that too much, but
I mean, she's not
suffice to say,
yeah?
she did the thing where you went, okay.
Oh.
Do you not? Okay. Whereas to me it was this traumatic.
Oh, it was terrifying. Yeah.
This absolutely visceral moment of the gauze dropping away from my sight about how horrible a film could be. Apparently not so much anymore. But we'll come to that in a later episode.
Okay.
In the Kurt Russell double bill, Escape from New York and The Thing, if you want to keep listening. Like, comment, subscribe. Is that? No, that's YouTube. That's not really...
I'm old. I don't do this shit.
No, me either. I'm trying to, but I fumble. So, the first film is Dark Star.
Let's have some music in here, Boiler. Sure thing.
Sunshine down
So, some tidbits of information. Dark Star was released in the US on the 30th of March 1974, shown at the Los Angeles Film Exposition, followed by a full theatrical release on the 16th of January 1975. Here in the UK, we didn't actually get it until 29th of December 1977, and even then that was on TV. So it didn't get a proper theatrical release here. It was made by Bryanston Pictures, who went bust in 1976 shortly afterwards. This is a theme in the first few of John Carpenter's movies. It stars Brian Norell as Lieutenant Doolittle, Cal Coneholm as Boiler. I feel like these names are deliberately to test me. Dre Pahich as Tolby, and Dan O'Bannon as Pinback. The infamous Dan O'Bannon, the following this, it was the co-screenwriter of Alien. So that's where arguably his cinematic legacy lies. It was written by Carpenter and Dan O'Bannon, shot by Douglas Knapp. The music was done by John Carpenter, of course. It was 83 minutes long on a budget of $60,000. And we don't know what the US domestic box office was done either because, well, I would say because they weren't measuring it, but they were. No one could really be bothered to check what Dark Star made, I don't think. But interestingly, and I'm going to do this for all the films, the adjusted budget, so if you were making Dark Star today, it would be about $360,000. January 1975, when it had its theatrical release, its primary competition was Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, Martin Scorsese's sophomore feature, The Eiger Sanction, James Caan in Rollerball, weirdly, two John Wayne flicks. I don't know if one was a re-release, I haven't checked, but Rooster Cogburn and The Shootist.
The Shootist, definitely.
Yeah, so those are, they're both Don Siegel. Are they both Don Siegel? The Shootist was Don Siegel.
Definitely Don Siegel.
And Fellini Satyricon. I just like the idea of Fellini Satyricon and Dark Star going head to head.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. Yeah.
I know.
Interesting
Which would you
double
choose?
Yeah.
Italian neorealism or
God.
hippies on a spaceship?
Definitely not the hippies on that one, unfortunately.
No, me
no.
either. Sorry, John. So right now, if you want to watch Dark Star, stop clapping my hands. Podcasting one-on-one, that terrible error. If you want, you can watch it. You can buy it on iTunes, Amazon, all the usual places. But if you want to stream it for free, you have to install Pluto TV on your device of choice. And that, unfortunately, has ad breaks. But very much probably how most of us saw Dark Star the first time, without breaks on TV. Or similar. The Rotten Tomatoes score for Dark Star is a surprisingly high, I think, 77%, with an audience score of 64%. For those who don't know, Rotten Tomatoes aggregate score is gleaned from a slightly arbitrary certified fresh rating from an assessment of critical reviews. The audience score is a slightly more direct metric from people who use the site and review on the site. The consensus on Rotten Tomatoes, which is the sort of agglomerated opinion into one or two sentences, is that Dark Star is a loopy 2001 satire, and it may not be the most consistent sci-fi comedy, but its portrayal of human eccentricity is a welcome addition to the genre. At the time, Variety reviewed it as a limp parody of Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey, that warrants attention only for some remarkably believable special effects achieved with very little money. Carpenter actually names this as his first bad review. By its re-release, though, in 1979, Roger Ebert said it's one of the damnedest science fiction movies I've ever seen. A berserk combination of space opera, intelligent bombs, and beach balls from other worlds. Still not quite a ringing endorsement. Key quotes, sort of lines from the movie, are, "Don't give me any of that intelligent life crap, just give me something I can blow up. And now it's time to go sleepy by, you worthless piece of garbage." So, Dark Star, Jonathan, first observations, first thoughts. Do you wish to contextualise it?
I mean, no.
It's going to be very short podcast then.
You can do that bit, and then we can. Honestly, the problem is Dark Star is I have no recollection of it, no matter how many times I watch it. It is really one of those where I'm like, I can see that there's plenty of things about it that I appreciate, one of which being obviously the names that are attached to this film. It's in hindsight now looking at it, you go, wow,
yeah.
Yeah,
Which is a reflection of what it was, which is the context,
Yeah.
isn't it? Which is that it was a student film,
yeah.
which got padded out after getting
It's probably the greatest student film ever made.
Well, that's
you
the
know?
thing. So that comment by from the Variety review is absolutely true. When you think of the visual effects, how they were done, and how little money and who was doing it, it is remarkable. Some of it looks shoddy.
Even
but-
more remarkable that you would start as a student film and end up having a review in Variety.
Yes, exactly.
You know.
And it garnered so much attention that it got a little bit of extra investment, and they padded it out, essentially. Got it to feature length, which is also why it's 83 minutes long. But that's not unusual. John Carpenter can hardly be accused of indulging himself in terms of running times. He's very lean, which is a good thing. When was the first time you saw it?
So actually, that's a funny one, see, because I didn't see that film until the Blu-ray release,
Which was
Yeah.
when?
which was about 12 years ago, maybe, if I remember rightly, and I'd never seen it. I knew of its cult status, I knew of it, but I'd just never seen it. And
So how many John Carpenter films had you seen?
I'd seen everything except Dark Star. That's the last film of John Carpenter I'd seen, other than obviously The Wall that he did later.
Yeah.
But
That's interesting. I think
Yeah.
I saw it. Now I have to. I haven't checked, but I'm pretty sure I saw it on Movie Drome. Do you know what Movie Drome was?
no.
So Movie Drome was a
You
TV.
forgot to mention we have a very specific cultural difference, you and I.
What, you're French and I'm English.
Yeah, and I
I
grew up
did
in
say
France.
that.
Yeah, but I grew up there, so it's not
So-
just a...
So to any listeners who didn't pick up on the subtle accent that Jonathan sports,
I could have an accent and I've grown in the UK. You don't know that. So
What, like-
I lived in France until I
That's
was
like-
22 years old.
it's not the same logic Jean-Claude Van Damme's character in Chance Boudreau in Hard Target used for why he sounded the
no,
way he did.
it works. It sound. I don't see a problem with it.
Anyway, yes, there was a cultural difference. So Movie Drome, for anyone who's my age, so old, who grew up in the 80s and 90s, Movie Drome was essentially a late night programming strand on BBC Two on Saturdays, I think, or even Sundays. So it was introduced films, cult films, originally introduced by Alex Cox. So he would do a little spiel and talk about, contextualise the film, and it was where I saw Terminator, it's where I saw Repo Man, it's where I saw Trancers, it's where I first saw Leone, it's where I first saw Kurosawa, so Seven Samurai in that case, and actually no, Yojimbo. I believe they screened Yojimbo and A Fistful of Dollars. In terms of, and it was an absolute film education. It was later taken over by Mark Cousins. It lost a little bit for me because something about Alex Cox was what I really loved. But I definitely think I saw Dark Star there. It would certainly fit the remit, so that means I would have seen it approximately between the ages of like 12 and 15, 16. So that would have been post Big Trouble in Little China, say, but certainly pre Memoirs of an Invisible Man. So still when he was arguably functioning in quite a high profile way in Hollywood.
I mean, for context, we had a similar thing in France. Well, two similar things. But specifically in the east of France, where you could get the Swiss channels. And you had the midnight movie every Saturday. So there is a possibility that I saw that at some point. But my actual first memory of it is the Blu-ray release, definitely. It was always it's always been one of those films where I want to love it but I kind of knew that it wouldn't.
Yes. Well,
but it's specific to what I like about John Carpenter. That's absent from this one.
That's what
Of course it is.
That would be my primary assessment. It's exactly what I think, which is that it's not that it's bad. It isn't. And I always, my thing is contextual viewing, which is when you're watching an older film, it is quite helpful to know where it sits in the canon, for want of a better word, so that you get a sense of. So like Citizen Kane, just viewed in contemporary ways, is black and white and not that interesting. But as soon as you learn that it was pioneered chiaroscuro, that it was the first time they put ceilings on sets, that they lowered the camera and the montage and the superimpositions were new, then you suddenly it lifts.
Of course.
This is incredible for what it is, But if the predominant stylistic device or style genre for Carpenter is suspense and tension, this is anti-tension.
Yeah, and there's also aesthetic notions that aren't present in this film. Obviously, for obvious reasons, it's essentially a student film, and you've introduced me as a filmmaker, but the thing about it is the first thing to consider is there was no digital.
Oh yeah.
So making a student film was already
Harder
a lot more difficult than it is to make a student film today.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the first step.
And more expensive.
And then more expensive. And then shooting the film was more difficult. Shooting film is more difficult than digital.
Yeah.
So in that respect, yeah, it's an admirable film. I just don't have a lot to say about it outside of that. I think that's the thing. You see the names attached to it, and I'm pretty sure that if you saw the film at the time, you could have predicted they would have a bright future. The signs are there.
Yeah, I think it's pretty analogous with THX 1138 in terms of how I feel about it. I think THX 1138 is a better film
In terms of production.
But if you come to George Lucas as what he represents now, it's going to slightly frustrate you, even more than American Graffiti, because American Graffiti, despite its period 50s setting, feels closer to Star Wars. The hot rodding, the humour, the sort of nerdy interaction of a couple of the key characters, whereas THX 1138 with its sterile, dystopian, very stripped back aesthetic, it feels anti-Star Wars. It was very much a 70s sci-fi film, as opposed where Star Wars ushered in the 80s era of sci-fi films. And I think this is the same.
Yeah.
It's not a typical John Carpenter film.
No, but there's already signs, and I think that's the only way that I look at it and find actually something interesting about it, is you can see the birth of something, and not just John Carpenter, in fact, because Dan O'Bannon,
yeah, it's like a divergence, isn't it?
Yeah, but he certainly made a few cult classics himself, even as a director, but as a writer, he also made his mark on comic books, and he's I would say, if we think about science fiction from the last century, that's weird to say that. Yeah. If you think about science fiction from the last century, Dan O'Bannon would be one of the names that would have to be mentioned.
Even if you ignore the rest, just for Alien.
Ignoring the rest.
So just the one thing. Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you're watching this, there is an interesting. It is so amusing to see the stuff to see Payback, Dan O'Bannon himself hunting down the beach ball alien and going, "This is Alien."
Yeah. No, it's there. It is there, and we can't ignore that it's I can think of at least one person it had a major influence on, and it's Danny Boyle.
Yeah.
With Sunshine, and his character is called Pinbacker. So
yeah,
it's
also the thing is, I always think that whenever I hear that people say that Star Wars invented the sort of used universe, absolute rot. Dark Star was there years before,
and even if you want to talk about even science fiction in literature and actually, even if you think about it, Méliès, it's not far off being the same idea with the rusty rockets, and it's executed in a different way. But no, I mean, but audiences love to have tentpole movies that hold their beliefs, So it's
the Andrew Sarris mode.
It's much easier to simplify the importance of one thing than to link it to the because if you start linking things, the problem is it always takes you to the same place, which is the creation of film, isn't it? That's
yeah, absolutely. But if you I think it's safe to make an assumption, a statement, and I think I wonder if you'll agree with this, that the current cultural climate we live in was born in the 70s, because that's when my generation specifically were bathed in certain pop cultural things, including Star Wars, including superheroes, that have become the dominant norm as my age group has taken over the manufacture, because it's the right word, of pop culture. Yeah,
and but what's interesting is the 70s, they're definitely probably the most transformative decade for cinema.
My favourite.
But because it was a battle.
Yeah.
It was a literal battle between two ideas of cinema, and we now see which one undoubtedly won. But it's weird because at the same time, this battle should have also. We should also see the seeds from growing from the other side of that battle.
Yeah, well, I think because this isn't just Dark Star, obviously, but I think there's a very interesting thing about how the 80s, when arguably the battle was first lost, but the residual quality that had steeped the creatives, the artists, it was still a higher level because there were still certain truths about filmmaking and storytelling which ran
and also
through.
you had filmmakers that were still alive from that period and still active
working.
and at their peak. That's the thing. Some of them, not all of them. But
and then the 90s, as it could have gone even worse, but then that's when indie film came in the US especially, and it tipped the balance again. Yeah. But sadly, post 2000, I think we've seen a steady. I'm not going to use the word decline because that's a subjective thing. I think a solidification of the corporate mentality.
Definitely.
So more.
But everything collapses eventually.
Eventually, and I think we're at an interesting point again because what's happening with Marvel right now is going to test the current status quo.
We're not going to go there.
No, not yet. That's maybe season 2.
Yeah, or season 12.
Yeah,
I made
12.
too many enemies.
So, but to go back to Dark Star, the thing that is that I would say it's a decent attempt at a feature. It's sporadically funny. It's incredibly interesting in its ideas, if not in its execution. And some of the technical stuff is just incredibly ingenious. Like, I love that. I pointed out, so after I watched it with Nia, I pointed out, that lift sequence? Mm-hmm. She said, well, his movement was so crazy, it was great. I said, well, that's because he was lying on the floor. She said, what? I said, you don't think they didn't build or put their writer-producer, co-filmmaker Dan O'Bannon in a lift shaft. They painted that and he lay on the floor. Mm-hmm. So she said, I had no idea. I was like, well, because they did it. The thing that they do, everyone involved, when they committed to a technique, they nail it.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
No, and it's amazing that it's still evidently works because the trickery it fooled someone who actually. But that's interesting actually because the whole thing about special effects and CGI now and all that is that here's something that's really interesting, and it was first brought to my attention by an interview I watched of Mathieu Kassovitz, of all filmmakers, interestingly.
Well, great film.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Probably one of my,
And he's very good in Amelie.
He is, and he knows the things. He's been good. And he's made interesting films. But anyway, and he pointed something that is pretty obvious, really. But once you start kind of picking it apart, it makes things very interesting on the way that we think about modern audiences and all that. And I said that once upon a time, you saw a shot like the traveling shot in Soy Cuba, or you saw an amazing shot, any shot, 2001, the floating pen, whatever. Yeah. Well, the one thing you did was wonder how they did it. That's interesting, isn't it? Today you see an amazing shot, you know how they did it.
Tap, tap, tap,
exactly.
tap, tap.
And it doesn't take anything away from the usefulness of CGI, for example, but it takes something away from the overall magic of cinema and why we love cinema.
It does.
And part of wondering how something is done.
Yeah.
That's and it doesn't have to be necessarily an argument against CGI. Like, for example, I remember sitting when I was 16 to watch Lord of the Rings and being gobsmacked by this thing. I'd never seen that before. Yeah. So your thing is, I've never seen that before. How did they do it? But I don't go to the cinema anymore and go, how did they do it?
Which is a bit unfair on CGI artists, because if they're doing their job well, they have to have an understanding of physics.
That's very true.
And science that you didn't have to have before.
And the worst thing about it is if they do their job well, you don't notice. Yeah,
because obviously this is sort of a plug for somebody else, but I love the Corridor Crew channel because they explain so much, and when you realise that if they're doing it properly and they're talking about wave displacement, fluid dynamics, the actual physical reality.
Don't get me wrong. This isn't isn't basic anti-CGI sentiment. But I have nothing against CGI.
But it's not filmcraft that necessarily.
I think it can be, and you see, this is it. I think if you think of things as tools, well, it's not the tool. It's the fact that you have a hammer and you use it for absolutely everything, and it doesn't work for absolutely everything. And sometimes you need that magic of, hang on, how was that done? that's when for me the real magic of cinema happens, is when you go, this is amazing, and then you go,
Yeah.
hang on a minute.
Well,
Yeah.
this is summed up by the reason that DVD extras have declined is because when the first avalanche of DVDs came out and you found you could have all these documentaries on there, the films that the library films that were rolled out, the documentaries were about makers, about something, and it blew your mind how things were done. Now there's only so many times you can see basically the progression shots of the plating of the CGI.
Yeah.
It's only so many times you can see green screen. There's only so many times that's interesting. On the flip side, you get something like Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, where you could watch a documentary about that all day long.
Absolutely. It's not that it doesn't exist at all anymore. It's just that there are tools that have become such an easy solution to everything.
Yeah.
That it's become a very rare thing to watch a film and actually question how things were actually done. And it doesn't have to be massive, right? We were talking about Kassovitz earlier. When you see the shot in the mirror on La Haine, right? It sounds a bit stupid to put it that way, but when you first see it, you don't even really question why you can't see the camera in the mirror. It's so
done
natural.
So well. Yeah.
But then you realize it's an impossible position, and how he did it is beautiful. It's simple, but it's beautiful.
But you've already named a quintessential shot for that, which is the floating pen in 2001.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know, if you've seen 2001, there's a moment early on in the famous Strauss sequence where you've got the ballet of spaceships, where you're inside the shuttle with Hayward Floyd asleep, and his pen is floating, and a steward comes along and picks the pen out of the air and puts it in his pocket. And you go, how? And that shot was done by having a super hyper polished piece of circular glass with the pen attached by a tiny bit of sticky tape, which was being rotated by hand, and she just came and plucked it off the thing. That's remarkable. Now it would be a CGI pen.
What's even more remarkable is that if you saw it now, you'd still wonder how to do it.
Yeah.
That's what's remarkable.
Because she interacts with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree with you. I think for me that does feel like one of Dark Star's primary values is a demonstration of technique, and in fact I don't know, I couldn't work out with the money they had how they did what they did.
Yeah, it's an impressive film.
It's hard to love.
It's hard to love. Yeah. There are people that do, and it's fine for me. What I love about John Carpenter isn't not cooked yet. Still in the oven.
So we're going to now also be very reductive. Part of this exercise, any film reviewing exercise, is to be reductive. So I'm going to ask you to give Dark Star a rating out of 10. How many pork chops out of 10 would you give Dark Star?
A 10 out of 10 if we think it's a student film.
That's not what I'm asking. It's got to be in John Carpenter. In John Carpenter's world.
In John Carpenter's world, it's probably a 3 out of 10.
I think I give it a 4. I think I'm a little bit warmer on it than you are. It would be interesting to revisit the scores once we've got all the way through, because in terms of how we rate the later stuff, where it gets a bit choppy.
Yeah. But we'll have disagreements.
Yeah, we will. And that's where it'll get fun. But so you don't want to take our word for it.
Not so fast, gentlemen.
The Zoom Review.
I enjoyed it. I thought it was a nice difference. It didn't have an obvious ending, as you thought it would, and it wasn't sort of a high-paced action type suspense one. It was sort of just like a nice change, especially just because, and I think they wanted you to know at some points in it what was going to happen, so at certain points you could predict, oh, that's going to happen next, or you thought that was going to happen and it didn't, and I think they did that quite well. The bit with the alien beach ball, that was one of my favourite bits, and the bit where the bomb thought it was God. Obviously in terms of effects and stuff, and sort of the space travel thing, but I thought that was fine, because obviously a lot of films don't do it in the same sort of way they did, and I quite enjoyed that, the fact that it wasn't a save Earth sort of mission, or we've got to go back. It was, oh, we have been sent out here, we're probably going to stay out here for ages. We're cool with that. It was very sad when the alien died. Because of apps like TikTok and stuff, we've got a very little attention span, and we all want action, like, again and again and again, and you don't see many suspense films like the other movies John Carpenter has made, or anything that just kind of is a comedy in that sense, where they're not focused on getting to the end right away or making this big revelation. They just want you to kind of enjoy it. That is something I'd like to see more of.
So, what do you think of Nia's, the Zoomer opinion, the Gen Z assessment?
I think it's quite a well-observed opinion, to be honest. So yeah, no, absolutely great. I like the idea that maybe the next generation will become interested in suspense again at some point, because it will be new again.
Yeah, I'd like that. I mean, the thing was, I was surprised. I would have put money that she'd find it hard to watch. And I was surprised. So I'm putting it on, and this is the first one we watched, of course, because I've tried to watch them in order as much as possible. And I was nervous. And she just, there were no complaints. There was no fidgeting, and when I asked her what she thought, it was so incredibly positive, and it was like, wow. Because you worry about things dating, don't you? And it has obviously dated, but equally, in a weird way, I think it might have come full circle.
I think it has dated in terms of how we even conceive production, but where it hasn't dated is the idea of DIY filmmaking. That's bound to have some importance in the way that it's perceived now as well, because we have access now to things they didn't have then. So this, I think there is value to this film, and it's in a way it's John Carpenter's most inspiring as a filmmaker myself, because you can look at it and go, oh, you can make films with not a lot of money or not a lot of skills even at that stage, probably, if you think about it in terms of where it's going. Yes,
and talking about skills is a good segue into the second film. It is true to say that Assault on Precinct 13 was the first real John Carpenter film. In a way that I
would agree with that. Yeah. Definitely everything is there.
Yeah. Some information first about Assault on Precinct 13. So it was released in the US on the 3rd of November 1976. It got its UK release on the 10th of March 1978. In future episodes, I'm going to put in French.
That would be good.
Fairly soon after release. It starred Austin Stoker as cop Ethan Bishop, Darwin Joston as Napoleon Wilson, Laurie Zimmer as Lee, but crucially, Tony Burton, who ended up as Rocky's trainer, later Apollo Creed's trainer, then Rocky's trainer in the Rocky saga, the initially ubiquitous Charles Cyphers in John Carpenter films, who I first remember from being in Major League, importantly, not only because of who she is, but also because of her name and what it gave cinema, Nancy Loomis.
Aww.
Yeah. So, Assault on Precinct 13 was written by Carpenter, was again shot by Douglas Knapp. I believe this was the last film that Knapp photographed. He did work on subsequent films, but he never... There's a reason why he was replaced. Not that he didn't do good work, but it's who he's replaced by. The music was by John Carpenter in his first truly iconic score. It was 91 minutes long, made on a budget of $100,000. Again, we don't know the US domestic box office, let alone the worldwide, and its adjusted budget would be $500,000 in today's money. In winter 1976, when it came out in the States, its competition was Carrie, interesting, with De Palma, Rocky, which is interesting because Tony Burton's in Assault on Precinct 13, and Rocky, Silver Streak, starring Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor, The Pink Panther Strikes Again, the slightly misbegotten King Kong remake, and another remake, the Chris Christopherson Barbra Streisand version of A Star Is Born. You can watch it on Amazon Prime Video and iTunes and buy it as ever. I think it's actually... So if you subscribe to Amazon Prime, you can watch it without paying an extra fee, so that's a good way to see it. This is... In terms of Rotten Tomatoes, this one is an immediate step up. The Rotten Tomatoes score is 96% with an audience score of 80%. The consensus is lean, taut and compellingly gritty. John Carpenter's loose update of Rio Bravo ranks as a cult action classic and one of the filmmaker's best. Ken Wlaschin, I can't say this, Wlaschin, Wlaschin, I don't know, who was director of the London Film Festival in 1977, said this: John Carpenter, whose small-budget science fiction epic Dark Star was widely acclaimed, has turned his inventive imagination to the thriller for his first solo directorial effort. The result, even without taking into consideration his tiny budget and cast of unknowns, is astonishing. Assault on Precinct 13 is one of the most powerful and exciting crime thrillers from a new director in a long time. It grabs hold of the audience and simply doesn't let go as it builds to a crescendo of irrational violence that reflects only too well our fears of unmotivated attack. It is a frightening look at the crumbling of rational ideas of law and order under an irresistible attack by the forces of irrationality and death. Famous UK critic Derek Malcolm, who was a veritable youngster back in 1977, said the great virtue of the film is the way it grabs hold of its audience and simply refuses to let go. It exploits all our fears of irrational violence and unmotivated attack, and at the same time manages to laugh at itself without spoiling the tension, a very considerable feat. Carpenter is clearly a director with places to go. He succeeded in making a comedy that scares the pants off us, and don't think you're laughing at it. As a matter of fact, it's laughing at you. And at the London Film Festival that year, Carpenter was awarded the BFI Award for Originality and Achievement for both Dark Star and Precinct 13. Key quotes: "Gotta smoke," and "I believe in one man." It's himself, in case you're wondering. So, I will, on this case, Dark Star, kind of, the reason I didn't give a plot summary is that's kind of hard to summarise it, but Assault on Precinct 13 is a very lean idea. A defunct police precinct that's in its final night is being babysitted by a newly promoted cop. Through a series of unlucky events, ends up housing some prisoners being transported from one death row to another, while then they come under attack by a almost zombie-like gang of thugs, faceless villains who lay siege to the precinct, and this unwitting group of motley admin team, cop and criminals have to band together just to stay alive.
Good summary.
Yeah. Well, I used to do this for a living. So, when did you first see Precinct 13?
Oh, so I saw that one on TV on a French channel called M6.
Ooh.
And it was it actually played after the Sunday erotic movie.
Did you watch that?
I did not watch that. To be fair, they were erotic only by name.
Right. Okay. But what was the French name for the Sunday night erotic movie?
Do you know what? I don't know. I think we just call it the Sunday night erotic movie. Le film érotique du dimanche. Yeah, and it showed after that. So I actually recorded it on VHS.
Ah.
So the first time I saw this movie, it was not in the correct ratio.
It's panned and scanned.
And it was
bad colour correction.
Yeah, and in French.
Oh no!
In French. Oui.
What's the French title?
Assault.
That's it. Assault.
That's it. Yeah, Assault.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's almost like Frenzy or.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, you should be happy they didn't butcher that one too much. The French titles we get are probably not as bad as French Canada titles.
What's
but
13?
Pretty bad.
13, right? 13?
13, yeah.
Yeah. So what's precinct in French? You don't know. Yeah, you don't have a similar word.
No. Assault.
Station 13.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I mean, yeah, no, it's just called Assault. And again, it was not the first film I saw from John Carpenter.
No, I mean,
that was because it was, later, much later.
Yeah, I would say that I think it's absolutely true. The first John Carpenter film I saw would have been Big Trouble in Little China. I was 10.
Yeah.
And I remember. I will come to that in that podcast, but that was definitely the one. And then it was backwards, and this definitely played in Moviedrome because this was a sweet spot for that strand, because not only is it an early work of a famed director, not only is it cult, not only is it genre, it's also a remake.
Yeah.
And I think I think it's fair to say that you could do a screening of Rio Bravo, Night of the Living Dead, and Assault on Precinct 13.
Yeah, that would be the family.
Cheerful.
Mum, the dad, and the child.
Yeah,
you know.
exactly.
Yeah, no, totally.
So it's for me, it's just great. Everything I love about 70s independent cinema is in this movie. It's lean, it's tight, it's kind of grungy. It's got lurid, bright red blood, so it dates it as the 70s straight away. It's the Carpenter's score is kind of reminds me of Texas Chainsaw in the way that Texas Chainsaw bludgeons you with the scream. The repetition of the main motif gets more and more weight. Later this is clarified, especially when we talk about the next film, how his music and his filmmaking do sit next to each other, and those two things together create incredible tension. And that's the great irony of The Thing, of course, is that Ennio Morricone saw The Thing and went, you know what, it needs a score like this, and it was basically a John Carpenter score.
Pretty much, yeah.
With some,
he doesn't hide that fact anymore.
No.
He plays it live now. The Thing, you know, it's
But there are flourishes in there that Carpenter probably can't do.
That have been cut.
Yeah. But everything you need to know about Carpenter is in this movie.
Yeah.
Everything. And that goes from the anti-hero, the smoking anti-hero who is lionized to some degree, that sexy bad guy thing, a Trojan horse attack on misogyny by using existing tropes and subverting them in a very clever way. It is slow burn. It's tick, 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 to the point where it's already grabbed you before you even realise it. It's witty, it's funny, it's exciting, it's brutal. It is absolutely got a boner for smashing windows and mirrors and things, which goes on throughout his career. And it's great.
Yeah. And you forgot to say that it's also how would I say that? It's defiant. I think this is the thing I like about this movie.
It's a flip in the bird.
It
movie,
is,
yeah.
and in any way that you look at it, including in just doing a western at that time, independent western, urban western. In the review you read earlier, what strikes me the most about all of these reviews, none of them say the word western, not even once. So it went completely over their head. That's what it was supposed to be.
It's very smart, isn't it? By picking LA, you think, it's only it is convenient if you live in Hollywood, but also I can't think of another city where you could literally put somewhere and be alienated in a massive urban environment. Yeah, because it's so spread out. And if you go into one of the really rundown neighborhoods, now you might be able to do it in Detroit, but at the time, it was perfect setting.
Yeah. And defiant is definitely a word that I would use for John Carpenter on literally everything. At any point, I would say everything he's ever done was defiant.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Because angry is the wrong word, because he's not angry, but he's definitely anti-establishment. And that's the irony of sort of where he goes for a period, but then that he's courted and goes Hollywood, but it never fits. No, because he can't do things in a conventional way. No, he's unable. The prism through which he sees the world, which you could argue his Hollywood experience is encapsulated by They Live, and expressed in that film. I
think the problem is you're talking about an American filmmaker who comes into the 70s with dreams of Howard Hawks and Alfred Hitchcock. Yeah. And by then, this is died already. Yeah. And very interestingly, even the way that he even considers filming and camera movement and lighting and all. There's a famous interview on the set of Halloween, I believe, where he's saying, he likes to create volume with light, and this isn't the way anymore. You have to use natural light and have those very naturalistic cinematographies, and he doesn't want to do that. He wants to. And
then he gets clever by writing a film that actually has to be done that way, because the baddie is fog.
Yes, and
married content with the style he wanted to do. Very,
but I suppose he, to some extent, he was already doing that with Assault on Precinct 13, because the other word that for me starts defining John Carpenter already is abstraction. Yeah, and the reason possibly that nobody noticed it's a western is because the threat is done in such an abstract way that it comes across either as a thriller or as a horror film.
When you marry that with his natural concision, he's a very concise filmmaker that heightens everything. I mean, I completely agree because, I mean, obviously he's associated with horror with his next film. There's no way he's never not going to be. But to think about all the things that are in this, the faceless villain, they don't speak. They're a force of nature. They come out of nowhere. They attack seemingly for no reason. They're simply driven by fairly random arbitrary. Even the early scenes where you set up these, but the reason for their attack, which
wasn't actually his idea.
But even then, he still did it his way. They don't speak.
Yeah.
They don't. You know, it's their actions are seemingly primal.
So that scene where they shed their blood, that was in there, but I think whoever produced it, I can't remember, but the scene where they shoot the gang, the police shoots the gang, so seemingly initiating what we're seeing later, was requested to be added. I don't think he wanted it in there. I think he wanted to keep it as abstract as it could possibly be.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I think to me the inciting incident for everyone is the shooting of the little girl.
Yes, of course.
And somehow, if you remove that opening scene, the implication is that when they do that, they pass a point of no return and they're set on this freight train of destruction and violence.
I think you also if you remove that initial bit at the beginning of the film, then what happens is that the gang seems to be motivationless, which is what I think.
Yeah, but they're
John
not
Carpenter was
motivationless, but just a.
But I think that's a good thing.
It reminds me of Straw Dogs, in the sense that it makes a statement of sometimes violence happens, and if you're in its way, you have to retaliate. Otherwise, you're going to get.
But I think that opening scene that was added later contradicts that.
Yeah, I think you're probably
that's
right.
the point. So I think it's and if you think about it, there's already traces of Michael Myers in there necessarily because of the taking that concept of something that's usually represented as a clear threat, and then taking it to the point where it's not. It becomes a concept rather than an actual incarnation of a threat. So it's boiled down to its purest,
because I think
most anonymous.
I think you would have followed it from the fact that the station takes in the father who has killed one of their own and is unable to speak. I mean, the whole. If you want to see a model of show don't tell,
Yeah, absolutely.
it's Assault on Precinct 13 is pretty much it. It must have been a very Spartan screenplay in terms of dialogue, because it's very little.
But that's what's interesting is when you say it's lean, I think it is true, and I think it's leaner because of that abstraction. Because all of a sudden, you don't need 36 scenes of dialogue that explains the motivation of, especially because going into something that's as at that point overdone as the Western. This guy. What's great in this movie is that the moment you see the characters, you know who they are. Mm-hmm. That's why there isn't a need for all this explanation and these backstories, because they all represent a concept, an idea that you've seen before. It's a new incarnation of these specific archetypes, and because he knows that, it means he doesn't waste any time introducing them. He just does it. It's a movement, or it's a walk, or it's a uniform, or it's whatever you want to call it. But you identify who they're supposed to be at that moment.
Yeah, visually.
Yeah,
character through presentation. But what is interesting about that opening scene and that being shoved in is I think he assimilated that though for Halloween, which is he did his version in Halloween, because I think there is more exposition in Halloween.
In a sense,
and I think that's so you get a better marriage of that need or perceived need for exposition up front. I mean, it's just the thing that I just love about it is the purity of the filmmaking, and it's not about money. And it's now he's got enough money. He's got more money. He's got more money than we've ever worked with. But nonetheless, you can't fake it at this point. So there is this gigantic leap between Dark Star and Assault on Precinct 13. Whereas, ironically, you could say in terms of scope and its satirical nature and its setting, Dark Star is bigger, but it's the necessary hippie looseness of Dark Star slightly undermines its impact. This is out of the gate. He's in control. He's already mastered his craft. Now he does refine it and develop it. And what's going to be interesting in our conversations later is whether or not that mastery curdles a bit in terms, or ferments, or whatever. So. Well, no, but we'll get into that later. But there's a question about that, and certainly I know we think we land on different sides of that discussion. But this is just, and you know, again, when watching this with Nia, this just worked, and it just gets you, and the tension. You are in the palm of his hand. He is telling you his story at the exact pace that it should be told, in the exact way it should be told. The edits, the camera choice. I mean, I doubt he shot coverage. It's so precise.
But that's the interesting thing, isn't it, about it all? We were talking about defiance earlier, and that defiance, that specific defiance, that desire to make something that was tremendously out of fashion at the time, and do it in a way that was tremendously out of fashion at the time. You would think that would land a film that is actually terribly out of fashion, and the opposite happens, because he leans into things that are quite universal.
The work,
and,
yeah, fundamentals.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What happens is that it becomes ahead of the curve,
yeah.
And when you see this film today, yeah, okay, you're gonna have a little laugh at the haircuts and at the clothes.
Not that much.
Outside of that,
yeah,
it is as relevant and as efficient today as it was then.
I was disappointed when I did watch Rio Bravo as a result of this.
Yeah,
but
different era.
Yeah, definitely. But when I think about the films which fostered my love of cinema, so if I accept that initial interest in that area was the cliche of my generation, so it was Star Wars, it was Superman, it was the blockbusters. My interest in cinema came much more through specifically John Carpenter, David Cronenberg, David Lynch, all active in this period, all iconoclastic filmmakers, all genre filmmakers. I mean, Lynch's trajectory was steeper than everyone else's. I mean, I can't imagine what Carpenter would have done with Dune, a budget the size of Dune, on his third movie. But it would have been interesting.
Yeah, it would have,
wouldn't it? But I think Lynch was clearly victim to that. I mean, I love that film, but you can see the weight of the infrastructure and the money weighs on his vision. And I think Carpenter would have had the same issue. He has it at a slower burn, I think. But it is, but also, your point about how accepted it was, or how much impact it has, it's interesting, because whether or not how much we love his work, he had a ceiling for his popularity. He had a massive influence, more so than his popularity. And I think because as you advance in his career, once if you look at, certainly you get past Escape from New York, when he really steps up into Hollywood in terms of money, his predilections, his preoccupations, his style even can't quite go with the current tastes then.
Of course it can't.
And he becomes oddly distinct from the system he's just had access to.
But he always was. I think that's the thing.
In fact, I think he makes his masterpiece in that setting.
Absolutely. But this again, it's the clear defiance of it, of wanting to just do films the way that they were when he loved films, rather than making a fashion statement about, oh, we make films like this now, or we make films like that now. But at the same time, that never stopped him from actually being way far ahead. You could argue, about the thing, that this is what happened.
Absolutely.
This is a guy who was just 30 years in advance. Yeah,
and I think that's the thing. And for me, a key genre for me, an absolute nexus of everything that I fed off in my teens and in my 20s was body horror. And the art and the prime practitioners of that, of course, I've already named three. But the thing is an absolute piece of art of body horror. Yeah. Where concept but we'll talk about the thing.
Yes, absolutely.
But everything that's in that film that makes it great is in Assault on Precinct 13, except for the special effects. That's it. That's the only real difference. Yeah. There's no fundamental difference.
But there's plenty of stuff that you go, hang on a minute. you know, I always loved the silencer assault on the Precinct with these pieces of paper that go.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah.
It's brilliantly done.
Yeah.
And yeah, of course you know how to, if you look at it, you know how to do it. But you'll have a moment of, hang on a minute.
And it has just occurred to me when talking about that the film we immediately go to discuss him is The Thing. Now, which is another Howard Hawks. Now, Christian Nyby on paper, but both Rio Bravo and The Thing from Another World were arguably Howard Hawks, so remakes. So it's that's an interesting observation, but I agree with you that's one of my favourite sequences, and just the fact that then it becomes the shattering of the glass, not the bullet sounds, and that's all completely removed, and its soundscape is beautiful, and that's where it marries with his score, that he's scoring with the sounds of the silent gunshots.
And if you want to get a little bit wanky about it, you could say it's quite representative of what he does for the whole film, which is removing essential elements that then make things become a little bit more abstract and a little bit more surreal. It's all completely in line with the film.
And he even makes his budget limitations a strength by tightening the claustrophobia and going to a smaller set for the climax. So you don't question that and think, oh, they're saving money by just going into a corridor and one little room, because it's a perfect thematic evolution of the plot. That they go, it gets tighter and tighter and tighter, and they get more and more confined, and their relationships it's a masterpiece.
It is.
A brilliant film.
It is. Not to mention that there's a very savage scene with an ice cream in there, which is still kind of hard to watch.
It is. Well, it's weirdly the film it always makes me think of, and it's again a similarly rogue, defiant filmmaker. It's The Untouchables, with the suitcase at the front. That because they use the same device to equally devastating effect, where you are just against the villains,
and that's also defiant to their own admitted master thinkers, which is Hitchcock, whose only scene he ever regretted was killing a child on screen, and these guys go in there and love Hitchcock. You know, I mean, there's literally two sides to Carpenter, arguably. And one's the Western, and the other one is Hitchcock. Yeah,
absolutely.
And defiantly doing something that Hitchcock regretted doing.
And it does make me think of George Lucas's comment about, if I want people to cry, I'll just break a kitten's neck on the screen. And it is kind of like doing that.
There's shock moments as well.
It's a numbing event, in a way.
It is, all the more so that the kid that actually gets shot was a Disney kid.
Yeah,
you know, and
I love that though.
It's brilliant. It is brilliant, and it all goes. The thing about Carpenter is, I think, he actually said about Assault on Precinct 13 that this is the moment. This is the film where he was still rooting for the cowboys, and by the end he was rooting for the Indians. You know, and so politically, I think that's kind of a process where he changed, you know, you had Vietnam War and all sorts of that, and I think that you can already see signs of that, change. But to my point being that I think, you know, we're talking about hippies with Dark Star, and I think this is a film where John Carpenter's becoming a punk. It's literally a punkish attitude at that stage. It's flicking the finger at absolutely everything, and I don't think that ever quite left him after that. I think you could argue that John Carpenter was one of the first openly geeky film directors, you know, out there, and part of the way that kind of work its way into his work, I think, is someone much like Tarantino, for example, who understands a lot of the world through cinema. And so you can always see his films as actual allegories on cinema as well. And so
that was a criticism that was levelled at him. People like Pauline Kael didn't like him because they felt it was all surface, all film comment, not life comment.
But I think that she, and no offense to her, but she probably missed the intertextuality as well, that Height was reflecting on George Romero's Night of the Living Dead.
Also a black protagonist.
Right.
And, so similarities.
Again, defiance. The thing is that when you take the core of any genre's kind of narrative conventions, and you start stripping down to the smallest possible factor of it, then what you end up with is again the abstraction of a core concept that's been part of a different. But by doing that, it means you can appropriate it and make it become something else. And so if you think about the assault on the police station, the concept itself, you've seen it in Rio Bravo, you've seen it in countless westerns before that.
It's the bloody Alamo,
right?
Essentially,
exactly. But what happens is that by reducing the core of what makes the threat, it flips it into horror. That's where it becomes horror.
Well, the skittering of them running between the trees.
It's surreal. It's unreal.
And the bit with the cars.
Yeah.
And I love that reset button, that moment of quiet where they think, where have they gone? What's happened? And it's like, it's not over. And he never explains where they went.
There's a suspension of the concept of reality at some point.
Yeah.
And that, I think...
Now you'd have to know where they went. Now people wouldn't just
you wouldn't accept
disappear.
it. You would not accept it. But the same way that, there's never a... Again, on Romero, there's never an actual real plot reason that you can explain for.
No, it's not. The Last of Us, you see, is good.
And the more it goes, the more abstract it becomes.
The Last of Us is a good example. As good as it is, especially, it had to come up with a new way, a new definition, and an explanation. And I miss the era where a threat was just a threat. Yeah, and it just happens because I think that's because also that's a very grounded perspective. But
I also think that once you've boiled something down to its simplest representation or simplest concept, then it's very hard to redo without being automatically compared to this bit of work. It's like taking it to its limit. There's nothing more you can do in Assault on Precinct 13 other than remove the threat altogether.
True, but then that's interesting because I think he does refine it in Halloween. I think there is a through line, and I think that
he does. But
there's a focusing.
But isn't that the point? The point I'm making is that when you look at Halloween, everybody even thinks about it as the first slasher, which isn't even true. Right, no. It's not even remotely true. But the reason people think about it that way is because he boiled it down to its purest possible form. But everything that comes after Halloween becomes Halloween-like. Yes, right? That's true. You're right. And so when you look at Assault on Precinct 13, I think at some point you can do another Assault movie, but this guy has boiled it down to the simplest possible form. So unless you go completely the other way, this is what's going to happen. You're going to become Assault-like. But
I do think one of the saddest things is because of Halloween, in some way, Assault on Precinct 13 was eclipsed because of the cultural impact of Halloween, for everything you just said, which is all true, and it is a great film. But I just 9 times out of 10, if you talk to people who say they love John Carpenter, they stop at Halloween. Or they start at Halloween, if you want to put it that way. They don't necessarily see Assault on Precinct 13. It's like, no, you've got to see that.
It's a shame because it's one of his, for me, one of his best.
How many pork chops do you give Assault on Precinct 13?
I'm going to have to go for 9.
Not full 10? No. Holding 4?
I've got to hold the full 10, but 9.
Yeah. I think for similar reasons, I'm going to say 8. Only because, for me, his very best has to have a little bit of margin, which is, I think
you're going to find I'm going to have a lot of films on 9.
Oh, no, well, no, that's okay. But that's what I'm saying. That's what I mean. Because I think there's going to be a lot of debate in between 8 and 10 for me. And I've always said, I think really, because I'm an auteurist by nature, because that's what the era I grew up in, I would reserve 10 for his greatest film. Yeah. Now, filmmakers can make more than 110, but I don't think he has. But that's
comparatively, there's definitely one that sticks out easily.
Yes. Yeah. I'm no doubt we will cover my favourite distinction between favourite and best at some point in the podcast. But let's see what Generation Z found of this.
Not so fast, gentlemen.
The Zoom Review.
I really liked it. I liked it more than Dark Star, just because of the pace and the mood of it. I enjoyed the way that it wasn't an obvious hero. They had the action bit that's really good in these kind of movies, and then they also have the bit that's sort of just makes way for conversation and building to make you really care about the characters. That I think if something like this came out now, they'd probably focus more on the action than on the actual making you care about the characters, and I think they would have done it really differently. I like Lee. She wasn't just the sort of one to sit in the corner and go, oh my god, we're getting shot at, I might die. I think it's quite rare for sort of this kind of movie made at that time for a woman to get shot and not go, ah! And have to sit in the corner and have somebody come over and go, are you okay? I will wrap you up, it's fine. It was quite a nice duality between her and her friend that showed what could happen, both sides of it, because there could be, it's like the sort of flight or fight response, where she was like, oh, I'll help, I want to help, because I'm not afraid of this. I am, obviously, but I still want to get out of this alive, and I acknowledge that we have to fight in order to do this. And her friend was, I can't. This is scary. We should give them what they want. I don't want anyone to get hurt, but I also can't do anything to stop it. I really liked the end. I don't think I have a favourite bit. I like the film as a whole, but I don't think I could pick out any bit that I was like, I like that the most. You can tell he has his own style, definitely, because the whole way through it was sort of the same music, and he has a motif that he repeats whenever some tension builds up. It's quite interesting to pick out what he's trying to do with it. The only downside is you know when something's happening. You know exactly when it's going to happen, because he starts doing that little bit in his music and you're like, oh right, something's about to happen, or something is happening. You might argue it is suspense or tension, but I was talking about the movies that I've been watching, and I said, oh, if you like that kind of thing, you probably like this. I think you should watch it.
So there you go. Gen Z liked Assault on Precinct 13.
Of course they did. Who wouldn't?
What was interesting about that we didn't discuss the remake. In fact, considering it's sort of a remake itself, I think it's because I don't really have a strong memory of the remake.
It's
Ethan Hawke's in it.
It's a skilled film. It's not badly done actually, as far as remakes go. But the problem is, as I was saying earlier, it's absurd. It's an absurd idea to want to remake it. You can't win, because if you go for full abstraction, you will just literally be a carbon copy. But if you add any more, you're distracting from what made the point of the film. Yeah,
it falls for me, and it was the beginning of the idea of redundant remakes. So for me, the Dawn of the Dead remake, which everyone goes on and on about, was the same. I'm like, it's fine, but it's not good enough for me to not want to watch the Romero.
No, but particularly with Assault, what it is it's genuinely it's a ridiculous idea, because at this point, Assault on Precinct 13 has shrunk this idea to such a reduction that it's now just a concept. So you don't
like a bouillabaisse.
Yeah, it's a concept.
Confit.
So you can do whatever you like. What is the point of doing an actual remake with the same title? You can just use the same idea and do it somewhere else. Do what
he did.
Exactly.
You don't remake Rio Bravo. You make Assault on Precinct 13. Instead, you make your tribute to Assault on Precinct 13. That's what's missing now. That's always happened, and what you do is you take your version of it, you run it through your contemporary prism, and you add your style, and it's a new movie. That's what they've forgotten. That's what The Matrix did so brilliantly, or more overtly, in fact. But it's a lost art.
Yeah. No, definitely.
Well, there you go. That was episode 1. That's our take and discussion on Dark Star and Assault on Precinct 13. I think it was quite interesting. It says a lot that it's always a pleasure to watch his old stuff, any of his work.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And just to keep it to be full circle, and to say, we really shook the pillars of heaven.
Oh no, you're not going to make me quote shit, are you? I'm terrible at that.
Well, I'm not going to call you
remember, for 22 years of my life, I saw most of these films in French.
No.
Oui.
How do you say? So okay? Then to finish, it's all in the reflexes in French.
Tout est dans le réflexe.
Oh, tout est dans le réflexe. And on that vaguely xenophobic note from me, that's the end of episode 1. Hopefully, see you. See you? Do you see people in podcasts?
No.
Hopefully, you'll listen to episode 2, which is going to be Halloween. and the little scene Someone Is Watching Me.
Okay, I'm going home. Keep your money.